Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Have you ever imagined a world where gas is like super cheap, like 60 cents a gallon,
Wow.
and you could just like fill up your car in your garage?
That would be pretty nice.
Well, back in the late 90s, that
Yeah.
wasn't just a dream. It was like almost reality,
Really?
thanks to the General Motors EV1.
The EV1, okay.
Yeah,
What
so
is that?
that's what we're diving into today. So basically, what happened to the electric car? Why aren't we all driving them now?
It's really interesting because it wasn't, like some thrown together science project or anything.
Right.
The EV1 had a really cool look and had some pretty amazing tech.
Hmm.
And people who got to drive it, they absolutely loved it.
I know. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But then it just like vanished, like a
Yeah.
puff of smoke.
Yeah.
GM took them all back,
Right.
and what happened to them?
Well, let's just say they didn't exactly end up in a museum.
So that's what we're going to try to figure out today.
Yeah.
What killed the electric car?
Hmm.
And to help us with this, we've got a great article
Okay.
that kind of sets the scene.
Uh-huh.
And then we're going to be talking about this documentary, Who Killed the Electric Car?
I've heard of that.
Yeah, it lays out like a whole suspect list of potential culprits.
Oh, like a mystery.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what do you think? Who are the main suspects in this electric car case?
Well, the documentary actually points the finger at a whole bunch of different potential culprits.
Okay.
It could be American consumers, or maybe batteries weren't good enough yet, or maybe it was the oil companies.
Ooh, yeah.
Or how about the car companies themselves?
Interesting.
That even looks at the U.S. government,
Oh, wow.
the California Air Resources Board,
Okay.
and even hydrogen fuel cells.
Wow. That is quite a lineup.
Oh,
Okay, so let's start unpacking all of this. And I guess first let's start with American consumers.
sure.
So do you think back then people just weren't ready to give up their gas guzzlers?
That's one of the arguments that the documentary explores. The idea that with cheap gas at the time and
Wow.
everyone wanting these big SUVs,
Yeah.
maybe electric cars just weren't appealing enough to most people.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But then, the documentary also shows all of these EV1 drivers
Yeah.
who were like super bummed when GM took their cars back.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? They
Yeah.
actually loved the technology, they formed these clubs, and they were really embracing this whole new way of driving.
So it sounds like there was some demand, at least from those early adopters.
Exactly. So it makes you wonder, did consumers even really get a fair shot? Were they really given a real choice?
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Huh.
Okay, let's move on to the next suspect, batteries.
Okay.
I mean, were batteries just not good enough back then?
This is where it gets really interesting. The documentary actually gives batteries a not guilty verdict.
Wait, really? I thought like that was the main problem with electric vehicles back then, right?
Well, the early EV1s did have lead-acid batteries,
Okay.
which, they limited the range.
Yeah.
But even with that range, these cars could handle most people's daily commutes.
Well,
And remember, this was a time of massive leaps in battery technology. Nickel metal hydride and lithium-ion batteries were already being developed,
yeah.
promising way better range.
So couldn't they have just like upgraded the batteries in the EV1?
Well, get this. There's an engineer in the film, Alan Cocconi,
Okay.
and he actually said that with laptop batteries that were already available at the time,
Yeah.
the EV1 could have hit a 300-mile range.
300 miles. That's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, even for today's standards, that's pretty good.
Exactly. So if batteries weren't the problem, then what was?
Okay, I'm very intrigued now.
Yeah.
Let's move on to another suspect.
Okay.
The oil companies. I mean, they probably weren't exactly thrilled about the idea of electric cars taking over, right?
Well, the documentary exposes some of the moves they made to try to undermine the EV1. For example, they actually lobbied really hard against building public charging stations.
Oh, that's so sneaky.
Right.
No charging stations, no easy way to use the cars.
Exactly.
Wow.
And they also funded these fake grassroots campaigns, basically paying people to say bad things about electric cars.
Really? Wow.
Uh-huh. And let's not forget those mobile ads. They spent a ton of money on ads bashing electric cars.
So like a classic case of, protecting profits no matter what the cost to the planet is.
It makes you think, who benefits from us staying hooked on oil?
Yeah.
And who loses out if we actually make this switch to electric?
That's a good question for all of our listeners out there to think about.
Right.
Okay, so let's move on to maybe the most interesting suspect, the car companies themselves.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this is where it gets really juicy, right?
It does get pretty interesting, and the
Yeah.
spotlight here is mainly on General Motors.
Okay.
Their actions were, well, let's just say, kind of suspicious. Well, on the one hand, they had those really cool, splashy Super Bowl ads for the EV1.
Yeah, I remember those.
Right.
They were great.
But then, at the same time, they were running these other campaigns that highlighted all of these fake flaws of the EV1.
No way.
Yeah. And the most incriminating evidence. They crushed almost every single EV1 that they got back,
What?
even when people offered to buy them.
You're kidding. They actually destroyed them. Why would they do that?
Well, the documentary offers a few possible reasons.
Okay.
First, they were making a ton of money off of those gas-guzzling SUVs and trucks.
Right.
Second, EVs meant way less money from repairs and maintenance.
Makes sense.
You know, no oil changes, fewer brake jobs, that kind of thing.
Less money for them.
And it wasn't just GM.
Really?
Other car companies like Toyota and Honda,
Wow.
they were doing similar things, you know, shutting down their electric car programs even when they were having early success.
Wow, this is starting to sound like a big conspiracy.
It kind of is.
So who else is on this suspect list?
Well, we can't forget about the U.S. government,
Wow.
particularly the Bush administration. They actually sided with the car companies against California's zero emissions mandate.
So the government was in on this too.
Well, the documentary doesn't shy away from pointing out these potential conflicts of interest.
Oh, okay.
Many officials in the Bush administration had close ties to both the oil and the auto industries.
It's starting to sound like they all did it.
It kind of seems that way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And there's one more suspect we have to consider.
Okay.
The California Air Resources Board.
Okay.
They were initially big supporters of electric vehicles.
Right.
They pushed for that zero emissions mandate, which basically forced car companies to start developing EVs.
Yeah.
But then they kind of backed down and weakened the mandate.
So they kind of like flip-flopped.
They did?
What do you think was behind that?
Well, that's the big question.
Yeah.
The documentary suggests that maybe there was a conflict of interest there. The head of CARB at that time was also running the California Fuel Cell Partnership, which was all about promoting hydrogen fuel cells as the future.
So they saw electric vehicles as competition.
Possibly.
Yeah. Okay, so before we get into that whole hydrogen fuel cell debate, there's one more piece to this puzzle that I want to get into.
Okay.
What was GM's official response to all of this? Did they ever try to defend what they did?
They did. In a 2006 blog post,
Okay.
they basically said, look, we didn't kill the electric car.
Right.
Consumers just weren't that interested,
Uh-huh.
and it just wasn't making us any money.
Yeah, it sounds like they were just trying to, like, cover their tracks.
Yeah.
You know, like blaming consumers
Right.
like it wasn't profitable. And all this while they're out there crushing these perfectly good EV1s.
Yeah.
Did they say anything about that?
They did.
Okay.
They claimed they couldn't, like, guarantee the safety of the cars or find parts to repair them long term.
Yeah, right. Like they couldn't have figured it out if they really wanted to.
Exactly.
It seems like they were just trying to prevent like a used car market from popping up
Yeah, that's what a lot of people thought.
and just control the narrative, I guess.
But the really interesting thing is, a few years after that blog post, Rick Wagoner, the former CEO of GM,
Okay.
he actually admitted that killing the EV1 was his biggest mistake.
No way. Really?
Yeah.
So they basically admitted they messed up.
He pretty much said they were ahead of their time,
Uh-huh.
but they just didn't see the potential.
Makes you wonder how different things could be now if they had just stuck with it.
It really does.
Yeah.
Imagine if they had kept developing the EV1.
Right.
Maybe they could have pushed for better charging infrastructure.
Yeah. Maybe we would be so much further along in dealing with climate change.
Yeah.
Maybe we'd be less reliant on oil, breathing cleaner air.
It's hard not to think about.
It's crazy to think what could been.
It is, but it's not all bad news. You know, this documentary came out back in 2006.
Yeah.
Back then, electric cars being everywhere still seemed pretty far-fetched.
Sure.
But look at where we are now.
I know. Electric cars are everywhere.
Exactly.
It's amazing.
And I think that's because of all the people who kept believing in this technology, the advancements in batteries,
Yeah.
and this growing understanding that we just need more sustainable ways to get around.
You know, even with that cynical title, Who Killed the Electric Car?
Yeah.
I bet that documentary actually helped to renew interest in EVs.
I think it definitely kept the conversation going.
Right.
And it challenged the idea that electric cars were just a fantasy.
Yeah.
It reminded people that there are these powerful forces working against EVs, and it made people think critically about their choices as consumers.
It's funny how some of the things in that film are still so relevant today,
Yeah.
like the power of the oil companies
Hmm.
and how government policies can really influence the future of transportation.
Sure.
And the debate about hydrogen fuel cells versus battery electric vehicles is still going strong.
For sure.
Some people think that fuel cells were just a distraction,
Right.
like the documentary says.
So we've talked about a lot here. What do you think are some of the key takeaways for our listeners?
What can we learn from the EV1 story?
I think the big takeaway is that technological progress isn't always a straight line.
Okay.
It can be really messy.
Right.
It's affected by money, politics, and what we as consumers are demanding.
It's like we need to think critically about the information that we're being given,
Yeah.
to question the stories that we're being told,
Mm.
and really think about who benefits from the way things are,
For sure.
and, consider the impact our choices will have in the future.
Well said. The EV1 might be gone, but its story is still really powerful.
Yeah.
It's a cautionary tale, but it's also a story about resilience
Mm.
and the human desire for a better world.
The future of transportation is still being written.
Exactly.
What choices will we make? What technologies will we choose?
It's something for all of us to think about.
Yeah, it really is.
That's a great note to wrap things up on. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive.
Absolutely. And to everyone listening, thanks for diving deep with us.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Keep those minds curious, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
It's kind of crazy to think about, what if things had gone differently?
Mhm.
What if GM had actually supported the EV1?
It's so interesting to think about.
Yeah.
The impact could have been massive.
Right.
Think about the air we breathe,
Yeah.
how much we rely on oil,
Mm-hmm.
even how our cities are designed.
Yeah. Like, what if we had quieter streets, cleaner air,
Mm.
and a much smaller impact on the planet?
It's impossible to know for sure.
Right.
But it shows that the choices made in the past, even small ones,
Yeah.
they can have a huge effect on how the world is today.
It shows that progress isn't always like a straight line, Like
Yeah.
sometimes powerful forces can get in the way of new ideas, even when those ideas could help everyone.
Exactly.
So I think this story encourages us to really be aware of those forces and to question who benefits from keeping things the way they are,
Right.
and to support the technologies that can lead to a better future,
Yeah.
like a more sustainable future.
I mean, on a more positive note,
Yeah,
it's pretty inspiring to see how far electric cars have come
absolutely.
since the days of the EV1.
Yeah,
Despite all those roadblocks they faced,
right.
they're finally becoming more mainstream.
I think that's because of those engineers who didn't give up
Hmm.
and the people who really believed in the technology.
Right.
And of course, consumers are demanding cleaner options now.
Yeah.
It shows that change is possible, even when there's a lot of resistance.
It also shows the power of our choices, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like every time we choose an electric car,
Yeah,
it sends a message,
it does.
and we contribute to a better future for everyone.
Exactly. The EV1 story might be a warning, but it also gives us hope. It
Mhm.
reminds us that people want progress.
So next time you see an electric car on the road,
Yeah.
think about the EV1
Mm.
and all the things that led to its demise.
And remember, we can actually shape the future of transportation.
We really can't.
The story's not over yet.
Yeah,
And this time, we can choose a different ending.
that's a great point. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive into the world of the EV1.
You're welcome.
And to everyone listening, thanks for diving deep with us.
Thanks for listening.
Keep those minds curious, and we'll catch you next time.